The morning rush at Marlene's diner always began before sunrise. The place sat on the corner of Maple and Fifth, its neon sign flickering between pink and blue hues that washed the wet asphalt with color. Inside, the smell of coffee, bacon, and toasted bread filled the air. The clinking of plates, the hiss of the griddle, and the soft country music on the radio made the diner feel alive, like a small heartbeat in an otherwise sleepy town. Emily Carter, the morning waitress, had been working there for almost 3 years. She was 26, with tired eyes that carried more weight than her years should. Her hair was always tied back, a few golden strands escaping no matter how tight she pinned them. Every morning, she poured coffee for truckers, regulars, and early commuters who came through before work. But one customer stood out, an old woman who always came alone. The woman arrived precisely at 7 a.m., rain or shine. She was tall and slender, always wearing a pale blue coat that looked older than she was, with a small brooch shaped like a bird pinned to her collar. Her gray hair was perfectly brushed, her posture straight, and her hands trembled slightly when she held her teacup. No one knew her name, she never said much. Emily started noticing her after the first week. The woman always ordered the same thing: Earl Grey tea, 2 scrambled eggs, dry toast. She never changed it. Sometimes, she'd bring a small book to read. Sometimes, she just sat and stared out the window, watching the fog roll over the street. Emily would often refill her tea without being asked. "Thank you, dear," the woman would always say softly, her voice fragile but kind. It became routine. Every morning, Emily would start the day by setting booth number 6 near the window with a white napkin, a small flower in a vase, and a teapot ready. She began to look forward to that moment, seeing the woman walk in, greeting her with a gentle smile, hearing the quiet gratitude in her voice. One morning in late November, the sky hung low with gray clouds, and the wind carried the smell of rain. The diner was quieter than usual. Emily noticed the old woman struggling with the door, her hands shaking harder than before. Emily rushed over. "Here, let me help you," she said, holding the door open. The woman smiled faintly. "You're very kind, my dear. Thank you." Emily guided her to the booth, noticing the way her steps had slowed, how she seemed more fragile than usual. "Cold morning," Emily said, setting down her tea. "Yes," the woman whispered, warming her hands on the cup. "It always feels colder when you're alone." Emily hesitated. She wanted to say something comforting, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just smiled and brought over a small plate of pancakes, on the house. "Something sweet to start the day," Emily said. The old woman blinked, surprised. "Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, dear." From that day on, Emily began adding little touches: a flower in the teapot, a slice of lemon, a free cookie when the woman seemed tired. And slowly, the woman began to talk more. Her name was Margaret. She had lived in the town for decades but had moved away years ago. Now she'd returned, she said, to visit old places and remember. Emily would listen while she worked. Stories of Margaret's late husband, a man who loved jazz and used to play the saxophone in New Orleans, her son, who had gone abroad and rarely called, her garden that used to bloom with roses. Sometimes Margaret would trail off mid-sentence and just look out the window, her eyes distant. "You must think I'm silly," she'd say. "Not at all," Emily would reply. "I like listening." Days passed, and soon the whole diner knew about Margaret. She became part of the morning rhythm, like the smell of coffee or the sound of the jukebox. But one Thursday, Margaret didn't come. Emily noticed right away. The booth by the window stayed empty, the flower in the vase slowly wilting by noon. Maybe she's sick, Emily thought. Maybe she'll come tomorrow. But the next day came and went, and still no Margaret. 3 days later, the booth remained untouched. Emily couldn't shake the worry twisting in her chest. She even thought about asking around town, but she realized she didn't even know Margaret's last name. That Sunday, Emily came to work early, hoping maybe, just maybe, the old woman would show up again. The diner was quiet, the air filled with the smell of brewing coffee. And then, around 7:10 a.m., the door opened. But it wasn't Margaret. It was 4 men in black suits, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing earpieces. They scanned the diner with practiced precision before one of them stepped forward. Behind them came a woman in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder. Her heels clicked against the tiled floor. Every head in the diner turned to watch. Emily froze mid-step. Can I help you? She asked, her voice uncertain. The woman smiled politely, though it didn't reach her eyes. We're looking for someone named Emily Carter. That's me, Emily said, her stomach tightening. The woman nodded. Good. I represent Mrs. Margaret Langston. Emily blinked. Margaret Langston. Yes, the woman said. I believe she frequented this establishment. You served her tea every morning. The mention of her name hit Emily like a rush. Is she all right? The woman glanced at the bodyguards before replying. Mrs. Langston passed away 3 days ago. For a moment, Emily couldn't move. The sound of the diner faded. She stared at the woman, her heart pounding in her ears. What? She passed peacefully in her sleep, the lawyer said. She spoke highly of you. In fact, you were mentioned in her will. The words barely registered. Emily felt her throat tighten. Her will. Yes, the lawyer said calmly. She requested that we find you immediately. Mrs. Langston left instructions in a letter. One of the guards opened a briefcase and handed the lawyer a sealed envelope with Emily's name written in elegant handwriting. Her hands trembled as she took it. Inside was a handwritten letter on delicate paper, faintly smelling of lavender. Emily unfolded it slowly. Greater than my dear Emily. You've shown me more kindness in a few months than most have in a lifetime. I came to this diner because it reminded me of who I once was, someone who believed in small kindnesses and human warmth. You gave me that again. I have no family who truly cares for me now. But I wanted to make sure the one person who did care, in her own quiet way, is not forgotten. By the time you read this, I will be gone. Please don't be sad. I have arranged something for you, something that might change your life for the better. My lawyer will explain. Thank you for the tea, the flowers, and your company. You reminded me that not all hearts grow cold with time. With love, Margaret Langston. Emily's hands shook. Tears blurred her vision. She looked up at the lawyer, speechless. Mrs. Langston was the widow of Robert Langston, the woman continued. Founder of Langston Holdings. Perhaps you've heard the name. Emily nodded slowly. Everyone had heard of the Langstons. They were one of the wealthiest families in the state, old money, the kind that built hospitals and libraries. She left you something in her will, the lawyer said softly. A personal gift. Emily could barely breathe. What did she leave me? The lawyer opened the folder and handed her a document. Emily's eyes widened as she read it. It wasn't money. Not jewelry. Not property. It was the diner. Marlene's Diner, the place where Emily had worked for years, had quietly been bought by Langston Holdings a decade earlier. And now, it was being transferred into Emily's name. For your kindness and compassion, the document read. To remind her that warmth can still be found in the simplest places. Emily sat down, her knees weak. The other customers watched silently, the room thick with disbelief. The lawyer placed a small box on the table. Mrs. Langston wanted you to have this as well. Inside the box was the bird-shaped brooch, the one Margaret always wore. Emily ran her fingers over it gently. It was cold and smooth, glinting softly in the morning light. The lawyer and the guards left soon after, leaving Emily sitting in the booth, the letter in her hands, the brooch beside her tea. The rain started outside, tapping softly against the window. Emily looked out, the same way Margaret used to, watching the world move quietly by. She felt an ache in her chest, but also warmth, the kind that comes from knowing someone truly saw you. That morning, when new customers came in, Emily still greeted them with a smile. She poured coffee, took orders, and refilled tea. But now, booth number 6 stayed empty, except for a small vase with fresh flowers and a single teacup beside a folded napkin. Every morning, she made sure that seat was ready. For Margaret.